Very good morning to all of you who have joined us for this devotion today. And it's a pleasure and a great opportunity to be sharing my thoughts on God's Word with you this morning. For today's devotion, I would like to take few verses from the letter that Paul wrote to Timothy. 1 Timothy chapter 6 verses 6 to 8. But godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. So if you look at this chapter or this book, Paul has written many instructions to young Timothy as he is going on with his ministry, and he talks about various aspects. But in this chapter, in the beginning, he is talking about one particular thing, which is godliness. And Paul talks about two kinds of people who perceive godliness in different aspects. The first one being people who perceive godliness as a means of financial gain. And the second one is godliness with contentment. Okay? So when you're looking at this godliness with contentment, is something that Paul is encouraging young Timothy to follow and abide by in his life as he goes on. So what is this godliness with contentment? In the later part of this chapter, you can look at him saying that, we brought nothing into the world. We take nothing out of it. So if you just have your food and clothing, be content with it. Now, it looks like a very simple instruction to follow. You have your food for today, you have clothes, be happy with it. But practically, if you think about it, the human mind, we always want more stuff, we want to achieve more things. And sometimes we complain, we're not really happy with what we have. So it's not really practical at every point to be contented. But that is something that Paul asks us to be. He says, as godly as you are, you have to be contented, because that is a great gain, is what Paul is telling. So I just want to dig a little deeper into this contentment and find out what is it. Like, how do I know if I'm content or not? What are the criteria that I have to check in order to find out if I am contented and if I am as godly as I think I am? So in the book Chasing Contentment by Eric Raymond, he pens down in a very elegant manner 4 important points of contentment, which he says what contentment is about. The first one being, contentment is inward. That is, contentment comes from within you. It cannot be forced onto you. Despite what your external circumstances are, you have to be contented, because contentment comes from within you. And a wonderful example of that would be Paul and Silas from the Bible, where they were in the lowest point of their lives. They were in prison. They did not know what was going to happen the next morning. But Paul and Silas were contented to a level where they were able to sing praises to God. And the rest of the story, what happens. But my emphasis on the contentment that they had despite the external circumstances. And that is something that we are called to have as well. The second point is, contentment avoids complaining. You cannot ask questions like, God, why me? Why do I have to go through this? And expect to be contented at the same time. They are polar opposites. You cannot complain and be contented at the same time. It just doesn't work that way. And a great example of that would be Job. So when he lost his children, he lost his wealth, his health was all gone. He was sitting among rubbles. And still then, he did not grumble against God. He did not question God or complain and say, Lord, I have literally done everything that you asked me to. Why me? He never asked that. He was very contented and he said, God gave and he took away. Praise be to God. That is the only thing that he said. That is a contentment that I talk about when I'm saying contentment avoids complaining. And the third one is, contentment is a work of grace. It is not something that can be developed like a habit, or it is not something that can be bought, or it cannot be sought after. It is a work of grace. When God's grace is within you, you are contented. You will be contented, and you can see that in the life of Abraham. So God blessed Abraham, and when it was time for Abraham and Lot to part ways, God's grace was upon Abraham. He was so contented that he was able to tell Lot, you know what, go ahead, take the part of the land that you want, and after you've chosen your part, I'll go the other way, is what Abraham said. And that is the contentment that you'll have when you have God's grace within you. And the final point, which is the fourth point, is contentment is resting in God's providence. Okay? So God's providence is one place where you have the ultimate peace, where you have the ultimate rest, and that will be achieved when you are contented. Maybe not immediately. Initially it might be a little difficult, like how you see in the life of Job. His blessings were not immediate, but his contentment were the footsteps for his prosperity. And that is what is, when you are contented, you have a chance to rest in God's providence. So as much as godly as you are trying to be, it is important that you have godliness with contentment. Once again, quoting the words of Paul, godliness with contentment is great gain. So I pray today that even amid all the situations, which is very unpredictable right now, this new normal that's coming around, I pray that we find within ourselves to be contented with where we are and work to fulfill God's purpose and God's will in our lives. God bless you all.